Picture a fan of women's sport.
England!
Picture a fan of men's sport. For many people, the two images differ. Now, picture a sports fan. Because the truth is, there is a group of people who simply enjoy sport, no matter who is playing. In actual fact, in the UK, 4 out of every 5 sports fans are interested in at least one men's and women's sport. And in the under 35s category, that figure rises to 85%. Still, fans clued into women's sport will know the excitement of seeing a sportswoman's name on the back of a jersey in the wild of the general public. Perhaps that highlights the rarity of such an occurrence. But what if there was an alternative universe where that was the norm rather than the exception? Walking through the doors of the Style of Our Own pop-up shop on one of London's busiest shopping streets, you'd be forgiven for thinking you had in fact made that journey to a parallel world, where female athletes are championed and in fact dominate the proceedings. Having opened on the 5th of June, it runs until the 31st of October, with 8,000 square foot of prime real estate on Regent Street, showcasing up to 30 women-led businesses and bespoke women's sport products. It's a concept that has been years in the works, and finally came to fruition under its founder, Laura Youngson, who is keen to capitalise on the hype surrounding the Summer of Women's Sport, with both the Women's Euros and the Women's Rugby World Cup on offer.
We saw all these comments online about girls especially walking into sports stores and not necessarily finding the gear that they were looking for, or to have the men's and the boys section, but actually nothing for women or girls. So we thought, what would it be like if we imagine this space that has a football pitch in, it's this kind of cool safe space. What does it look like to be a fan of the women's sport ecosystem? What does it look like to go and get your period underwear and your sports bras? And it's kind of snowballed from there.
While it's a retail store, there's an experiential nature to the space as well, with an indoor football pitch, a golf simulator and a DJ deck all in the shop, which hosts everything from watch parties and talks from guest speakers to music gigs and run clubs. Creating a space where women's sports fans can coalesce and meet like-minded people was a deliberate move by those behind the idea, as explained by Charlie Carrington, Senior Vice President for Marketing and Communications for the UK and Ireland division at MasterCard.
The foundation of that is really around experiences mattering more than things. So we recognise actually for a long time that experiences really matter, and in fact they matter more now, I believe, than they ever have done before. And what we're seeing from our data, our spend data, is that people want more than just to watch a match. They want that experience, the connecting, bonding experience with their friends and their family. And that's why, you know, this kind of space is so special, because you can have those bonding experiences.
Both Youngson and Carrington have been overwhelmed with the support the project has received during its lifespan so far.
It's been wild, to be honest. We've had people that are crying because they're like, I literally never dreamed that this space would exist in my lifetime, through to like sub 10-year-olds who are like, this is normal, and you're like, great, this is awesome, this is how it should be.
Understanding that audience for women's sport is key to commercial endeavours in the future. Visibility is vital, of course, which is why the TV audience matters. If 4 out of 5 people who watch sport will watch at least one men's and one women's sport, then there's a solid base. This figure emerged from the research carried out by Sky Sports and consultancy firm the Gemba Group. The study also found that women's sports fans are more passionate about more sports overall, spending 5 hours more on sports content per month and being 10% more likely to be a paid subscriber for sports content. They also tend to have higher average incomes. Sky Sports head of women's sport, Joe Osborne, explains how that informs a broadcaster like Sky's strategy.
So when you think about women's sport, it's often positioned as really niche. It's over there, it's a brand new fan base, and in some cases that's true, but it's small and it's different. Whereas actually we found that the interest levels were there across a lot of passionate sports fans, and we talk about them as the sort of silent majority. So that 80% that sits in the middle, there's a very loud group on the outside that say, I don't want to watch women's sport, I don't want to watch men's sport, but they're actually not as big as that, not anywhere near as big as that central group. And then there's a small sliver of people that also say, I only want to watch women's sport. And that's very exciting for the growing fandom, but again, they're not the biggest group. So for a company like Sky Sports, where we have a lot of passionate sports fans as subscribers, and we're always interested in finding more. This is really interesting because we know that then we can increase the engagement and bring women's sport to the fans that we already have on platform, as well as then speaking to those who aren't yet on our platform.
Claire Kelly, the Managing Director of Gemba Group Europe and Middle East, who also worked on the research, details how the women's sport audience can differ depending on where you look for them.
When broadcasters or brands or rights holders are thinking about their fan, they are really thinking about it in that holistic sense rather than just necessarily through the sense of the attendee in the stadium. One of the major hypotheses we had at the start of this project was that we as an industry are too fixated on the people that are within the stands as the true view of the overarching audience for women's sport. And it's incredibly easy to do because we've all been there within a stadium and looked around and gone, it is a completely different audience. There's so many more women, there's so many more families, the vibe is different, it feels so much less stressful and tribal and aggressive, and it feels more inclusive, and people are drinking different drinks and wearing different things, and I've got young kids and I take them to women's football matches over men's football matches, so there's absolutely no doubt that plays out from an attendance point of view. But actually, to Joe's point, what we've seen in our data for years and why we felt so compelled to make sure that this wasn't gendered is that when you're actually thinking about broader fandom that is actually encompassing sitting on the sofa and watching a match on a Saturday afternoon, actually that demographic split is different. And no matter what sport we look at, it still skews more male than female. And Joe's right, tennis is the closest in terms of parity, but even still, when you look at the overarching sports fan demographics, even for tennis, it's still more male than female. And that is the case for women's tennis as well as men's tennis, women's football as well as men's football.
Further research, such as that compiled by the Women's Sport Trust as recently as July, found that consumers increasingly link women's sport with values such as inclusion, empowerment and community. Brands that reflect these principles are said to be more likely to earn trust and long-term brand impact. This has been seen in an Irish context too. Since Sky Ireland began sponsoring the women's national football team, there has been a sharp rise in affinity to the brand. They focused on promotion of the team through in-person activity with individual players, social media and ads across TV and radio. Caroline Donlan is Director of Marketing and Brand at Sky Ireland.
And how it came about is we as a brand were looking for a sponsorship here in Ireland to activate, and we were looking for something that would help us build even better connections with Irish consumers and the Sky brand here in Ireland, and hopefully drive greater consideration of the products that we offer here today. So when this sponsorship, we came across it, for us we felt it was a natural fit. It very much matches our values around diversity and inclusion in sport, and obviously a key objective of both Sky Ireland and Sky Group is to increase and drive awareness of women in sport and women's sports, and we do that today obviously with broadcasting the WSL as well. So as I say, when we came across it, it felt like the right fit for Sky Ireland. That was probably another key reason that we got involved, because when we looked at our customer demographic, there was definitely an opportunity of growth for us to start speaking more directly with women, but also with young families. So again, this is a key cohort and fan base when you look at the women's team. And when we signed up with the women's team, and then we looked at how do we activate the sponsorship, and what do we want to give from a sponsor perspective. And for us, it's always been about the team, and it always will be. We didn't want it just to be a badging exercise that Sky is just on the jersey. So we went out and we did some research. We spoke with fans, consumers, men, women, and to find out what they knew about the team. And what we did find out was that the Irish public felt they wanted to get involved and support the team, but the main barrier was they just didn't know enough about them. So what we wanted to do was use our brand and use our media investment to essentially elevate the team and get both the team, the players and the profile out there with the Irish public, and hopefully get them supporting them and grow their fan base.
Embracing promotion, sponsorships and the rise of the experience economy, a new era of women's sport continues to be forged for the many rather than the few.
What I love about the way that women's sport is growing currently, and I hope it continues to grow this way, is essentially you are building it for women and girls, so to include women. So you're building this incredible product that is going to appeal to everybody, because actually a lot of traditional sport wasn't built for women and girls, it was built for men. So you're not building it necessarily to, and then now they're having to adapt to, be it like facilities in stadia, be it, the way that they market, to think about that wider audience. Whereas women's sport is often being built to include that audience, but actually when it's done brilliantly, it also attracts men. So this idea that you have to stop at women and girls, you should be building a product that is brilliant for everybody. And when it's done right, that's what happens.
I suppose if you were to ask me what would success look like in this space, it would be that in 5 years' time, we're not having a conversation about the women's sports fan. We're having a conversation about football or tennis. And then at that point, are we talking about which matches, which fixtures, which leagues, and is it the WSL or is it the EPL, rather than are we talking about women's sports fans as a collective, then going in through that front door? And that would be a generational shift, and I think it's something that we should aim for.
This video is part of the Same But Different series, looking at what sets women's sport apart. For more, you can follow the series on the Irish Independent.